I thought my life was perfect. Until my wife's affair destroyed everything. For as long as I could remember, life with Sarah had felt like a dream. We'd met when we were in high school, both awkward and shy, but somehow drawn to each other in ways that felt fated. Our relationship was built on a foundation of shared experiences, laughter, and an undeniable connection. We got married after college, and I knew, with absolute certainty, that I had found my person. Life after marriage was everything I'd ever hoped for. We settled into a comfortable suburban home, tucked away in a quiet neighborhood where the biggest stressor was choosing between taking a walk in the park or watching a movie at home. Our routines were predictable, but they were ours, and there was something comforting about that. We had our small, intimate world, and nothing ever seemed out of place. I worked as an IT consultant, a stable job that paid well enough to cover the bills and give us the freedom to enjoy life. Sarah worked as a marketing manager, and while her job was demanding, it never seemed to affect our connection. She'd come home after a long day, and we'd share a meal together, talking about everything and nothing at all. There was always laughter, warmth, and a sense of peace. We didn't have kids yet. We'd talked about it for a while but weren't in any rush. We were enjoying our freedom, taking spontaneous trips on weekends, making memories that we would cherish forever. It was that picture-perfect life that others envied and that we had worked so hard to create. But as time went on, I started to notice small shifts. Little things that, on their own, might not have seemed significant, but when added up, they formed a nagging feeling in the back of my mind. Something was changing. Sarah, once so affectionate, had become more distant. She wasn't as quick to share the details of her day or ask about mine. The intimacy we once shared had begun to fade, and while we'd both been busy with work, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. She still smiled when I came home, still kissed me on the cheek, but there was an underlying tension I couldn't ignore. It wasn't just her. There were moments when I'd catch her staring off into space, as though lost in thought, as though something was on her mind that she wasn't sharing with me. I thought it was work stress at first. She'd been handling a big project at the office, but then I started to wonder if it was something more. She had always been a night owl, just like me, but lately, I found her staying up later than usual. She'd be on her phone, her face illuminated in the dim light, and when I asked her who she was talking to, she'd quickly change the subject or make some excuse about work emails. I tried not to jump to conclusions, but a small seed of doubt had been planted. Was it just my imagination? Or was something more sinister at play? I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but I knew that things between us had subtly shifted, and the peace I had once felt began to crack under the weight of uncertainty. It was a Wednesday evening when I first noticed the real change. I came home from work, tired but content, ready to relax and unwind with Sarah. She wasn't in the kitchen, where she usually greeted me with a warm hug and a kiss on the cheek. Instead, I found her curled up on the couch in the living room, eyes fixed on her phone. "Hey, how was your day?" I asked, dropping my bag onto the chair. She didn't respond immediately. Her fingers hovered over the screen as she scrolled through something, her face lit by the soft glow of the device. After a moment, she looked up, her smile tight, more out of habit than genuine warmth. "Oh, you know. Busy. Just getting through the week." Something in her tone caught my attention. It wasn't like Sarah to be so detached. She'd always been the one to engage, to ask about my day with that genuine curiosity. But now, it felt like I was talking to a stranger. I shrugged it off, trying to tell myself it was nothing, maybe just stress from work. She had been dealing with a tough campaign launch recently, after all. But over the next few weeks, the distance between us only seemed to grow. It wasn't the big things. She still cooked dinner, still went about her day. But it was in the details, in the little shifts that started to pile up. I noticed that she was spending more time on her phone than usual. When I asked who she was texting, her response was always vague. Just work stuff or nothing important. She'd tuck her phone away quickly, as if she was hiding something, but when I asked, she assured me it was nothing. Then there were the late nights. She'd come home after what she said were work drinks, her cheeks flushed and her laugh a little too loud. She didn't seem drunk, but she was definitely off, almost giddy in a way that was unfamiliar. I wasn't one to interrogate her, but I noticed that she didn't mention the details of her evenings like she used to. I would have assumed it was nothing if it weren't for the subtle changes. The way she'd glance at her phone during dinner, as if waiting for a message or looking for an excuse to check it. One night, as she was getting ready for bed, I noticed she was texting again. I wasn't proud of it, but my curiosity got the best of me. I leaned over, catching a glimpse of her phone screen before she locked it. The name Jake appeared on the screen. I didn't recognize it, and I wasn't sure why it bothered me. Maybe it was the way she smiled when she typed something back, the way her fingers moved with a kind of rhythm that was unfamiliar to me. I told myself I was overthinking things. It could be just a colleague, a friend, someone from her book club. But the unease lingered. The next few days, I couldn't stop wondering who Jake was. Why was he texting her so late? Why was she so secretive about it? I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but the more I thought about it, the more my gut told me there was something I wasn't being told. It wasn't like Sarah to hide anything from me. We were partners, open with each other about everything. So why was she suddenly becoming so guarded? I tried to ignore it, telling myself I was just imagining things. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Sarah's behavior, once so predictable and warm, had become a puzzle I couldn't solve. And the more I tried to convince myself everything was fine, the more I found myself questioning whether I was just too blind to see the truth. It wasn't until a rainy Thursday evening that my suspicions truly escalated. Sarah had gone out with some friends from work, and I was home alone, tired from a long day. After making myself a quick dinner, I sat down to catch up on some emails. But as the evening wore on, I found myself drifting back to thoughts of Sarah's strange behavior. My mind kept returning to that name, Jake. It was almost like an itch I couldn't scratch, a thought that wouldn't leave me alone. I told myself it was nothing. People have friends, right? People text late for all sorts of reasons. But the more I tried to push the thought away, the more it consumed me. I glanced at the clock, it was already 9 p.m., and Sarah hadn't texted or called to let me know when she'd be home. I felt a pang of irritation, but I tried to let it go. She had a life outside of me, after all. I should trust her. Still, the doubt gnawed at me. As the evening dragged on, I found myself pacing through the house, unable to concentrate on anything. The phone kept buzzing on the kitchen counter, but I ignored it. But then I realized something. Sarah's phone was sitting on the coffee table, unattended. She'd left it behind when she'd gone out. A small, rational voice inside my head told me to leave it alone, that snooping was a violation of trust. But the unease I felt was stronger. It was a moment of weakness, one that I regret now but can't take back. I picked up her phone. Her fingerprint unlock code was easy enough to guess. We had shared everything, even our passwords, until recently. I'd always trusted her implicitly. But now, I felt an unfamiliar sense of dread as the screen unlocked. There it was, the text messages from Jake. My eyes skimmed through them quickly, each message sinking deeper into my chest. I read one that made my stomach drop. Can't wait to see you again tonight. I miss you. I miss you too. I'll make sure no one finds out. It was like a punch to the gut, the air knocked out of me. My brain couldn't process what I was reading. This wasn't just a few casual texts. This was an affair, a full-fledged betrayal. I felt my world begin to tilt, my stomach churning as the truth began to settle in. I read more, pictures of Sarah laughing with Jake, holding a glass of wine, her smile wide and carefree. She looked different, freer, even in these photos. She wasn't the woman I knew, the one who came home to me every night. This woman, the one in the pictures, was someone else entirely. I didn't want to believe it. Part of me kept hoping it was a misunderstanding, that there was some innocent explanation. But I knew deep down that it wasn't. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me, and I put the phone down before I saw any more. The room spun as I tried to hold myself together. My mind raced through the memories of the past few months, all the little signs I had missed or ignored. Her distance, her late nights, the secrecy. I had been blind. I don't know how long I sat there, feeling the weight of it all pressed down on me. It wasn't just the affair that hurt, it was the realization that I had failed to see the cracks in our marriage, that I had ignored the signs, thinking everything was fine. I wanted to call her, to confront her right then and there, but I couldn't. The shock was too fresh. Instead, I sat there, trembling with anger, hurt, and disbelief, the truth of her betrayal washing over me in waves. This wasn't just about a mistake anymore, this was about the foundation of our entire life together being built on lies. The minutes seemed to stretch into hours as I sat on the couch, staring at Sarah's phone like it was some sort of foreign object, unable to fully comprehend what I had just discovered. My heart raced in my chest, each beat punctuating the growing realization that my life had just been shattered. The betrayal was so raw, so painful, that I could barely breathe. The more I thought about it, the more everything started to make sense, or rather, everything started to unravel. Her late nights, her distance, the way she seemed distracted lately. I dismissed it all as stress, or maybe her just needing space. But now, I saw it for what it truly was, a woman who had been emotionally and physically involved with someone else. A woman who had been lying to me, hiding a secret life. A woman who I thought I knew, but now seemed completely foreign. I don't know how long I sat there, numb, before I finally decided I couldn't wait any longer. I needed to confront her. The anger surged through me as I grabbed my keys and left the house, heading to the restaurant where she'd said she was having dinner with friends. I wasn't sure if she would be there yet, or if I'd even find her. But at that moment, I couldn't stay home any longer, wallowing in the suffocating silence of my own disbelief. I arrived at the restaurant just as Sarah was stepping out of her car. She didn't notice me at first, her focus on her phone as she walked toward the entrance. My pulse quickened as I approached her, and when she finally looked up and saw me standing there, her eyes widened in surprise. "Chris," she said, her voice faltering. There was a nervousness in her expression that I had never seen before. "Who's Jake?" I asked, my voice cutting through the tension between us. The words felt like a punch in the gut, but I forced myself to say them anyway. This was no longer the time for games or uncertainty. I needed answers, and I needed them now. Her face drained of color, and for a moment, she looked like a deer caught in the headlights. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. I could see her scrambling, trying to think of some way to explain, but she was caught. She knew. I knew. "Chris," she started, but I couldn't let her finish. "Don't lie to me, Sarah," I interrupted, feeling the weight of the betrayal crashing down on me. "I know. I saw the messages. The pictures. The texts where you're telling him that you miss him, and that you can't wait to see him. I saw it all. You've been lying to me. You've been cheating on me. With him." Her eyes filled with tears, and she opened her mouth to speak, but again, I couldn't let her. The hurt, the anger, it was all bubbling up, a wave that was impossible to hold back. "I don't even know who you are anymore," I continued, my voice shaking with emotion. "The woman I thought I knew wouldn't do this. How could you? How could you betray me like this? After everything we've built?" Sarah's hands trembled as she wiped away a tear, but I could see the guilt in her eyes. I wanted her to feel the pain I was feeling, but I also knew that it wasn't going to change anything. The damage was already done. "I never meant for it to happen, Chris," she said, her voice cracking. It just did. I was lonely. You were so focused on your work, and I felt neglected. Jake was there for me when I needed someone." I heard the words, but they barely registered. How could she justify it? How could she make it sound like it was some kind of mistake? This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment, it was an affair. She had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. "You could have come to me, Sarah," I said, the hurt making my voice tremble. "You could have talked to me. But instead, you chose him. You chose to lie. To betray me." Her tears flowed freely now, but they didn't make me feel better. If anything, they made the entire situation worse. The woman I loved, the woman who had promised to stand by me through thick and thin, had done the one thing that would tear us apart. She had chosen someone else over me. I wanted to yell. To scream. to make her understand the depth of what she had done. But all I could do was stand there, paralyzed by the pain, as she sobbed in front of me. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of her own crying. "I never wanted to hurt you." But it was too late for apologies. The trust had been broken, the foundation of our relationship shattered. The life I thought we had, the life I thought we were building together, was no longer real. The silence between us was deafening as Sarah continued to cry, her face buried in her hands. I stood frozen, the anger and pain mixing into a swirling mass of emotions I couldn't control. I wanted to say something, anything, to make this moment stop, to make it go away. But the reality of what she had done couldn't be undone. The betrayal was already etched into my mind. Why him? I finally asked, my voice breaking through the tension. What was it about Jake? Wasn't I enough? Wasn't what we had enough for you? Her sobs intensified, but she didn't answer right away. Instead, she shook her head, looking lost in her own guilt. "I don't know," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I never meant for it to happen. I just felt so alone, Chris. You were always working, always buried in your projects, and I felt invisible. I tried to make things work, I really did. But when Jake came into my life, when he started paying attention to me, I don't know. It just happened." I listened to her words, but they felt like nothing more than weak excuses. She was trying to make sense of what she had done, trying to justify it with her own version of events. But none of it made sense to me. "You don't get it," I snapped, the anger rising in my chest. "You don't just fall into an affair. You don't just accidentally hurt the person you love. You chose to do this. You chose him over me." I could feel the tears welling up, but I refused to let them fall. I was too angry, too hurt to let my emotions fully take over. I had to stay strong, if only for a moment. "I trusted you, Sarah," I continued, my voice rising now. "I trusted you with my heart, with my life. And you threw that all away. You lied. You betrayed me. I don't even know who you are anymore." She reached out for me, but I stepped back, shaking my head. I couldn't let her touch me. Not now. Not after everything that had happened. "Please, Chris," she pleaded, her voice breaking as she tried to regain some composure. "I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. But I'm sorry. I never wanted to hurt you. You mean everything to me." I was just confused. "Confused?" I repeated, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. "You don't get to use that as an excuse. You knew exactly what you were doing, Sarah. You knew. You just didn't care enough about me to stop." She fell silent, her eyes pleading for forgiveness, but there was nothing left in me to give. All the love I once felt for her had been eclipsed by the overwhelming pain of betrayal. I wanted to forgive her, I really did, but the damage was too deep, and I didn't know if I could ever trust her again. "I don't know if I can do this," I muttered, shaking my head as I stepped away from her. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you for this." The words hung in the air between us, heavy with the weight of everything that had just been laid bare. Sarah's face crumpled, and she collapsed onto the ground in a heap of sobs. She was sorry, I could tell, but it was too late. The trust that had once held us together had been shattered into pieces too small to fix. For a long moment, I just stood there, unsure of what to do next. I felt trapped in this whirlwind of emotion, my head spinning with questions and doubts. I loved her, or at least I thought I did. But could I ever look at her the same way again? Could I ever believe in her, in us, after everything that had happened? "Please, Chris," Sarah whispered again, her voice barely audible through her tears. "Please don't leave me." I could feel my heart breaking all over again, but the truth was, I wasn't sure if I could stay. Not when everything felt like a lie. "I need space, Sarah," I said finally, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. "I need time to think. I don't know what's next for us, but right now, I can't be around you. I can't do this." Her eyes widened with fear, but I didn't stay to comfort her. I couldn't. I turned on my heel and walked away, my footsteps heavy as I left her standing in the parking lot. She called my name, but I didn't look back. As I drove home, the tears I had been holding back finally came, but they weren't for Sarah. They were for the man I had become, the version of myself I could no longer recognize. The man who had been betrayed. The man who no longer knew what was real. The next few days passed in a blur of confusion and pain. I didn't know what I was supposed to feel. The anger was still there, raw and relentless, but beneath it, there was this deep, hollow emptiness. I had thought that once I confronted Sarah, I would have some kind of clarity. But instead, I felt lost. My whole world had crumbled, and all I could do was sit in the wreckage, unable to put anything back together. After I left the restaurant that night, I didn't go home. I couldn't. I couldn't face the house that had once been my sanctuary, the place where Sarah and I had shared our life. It felt like an alien space now, foreign and full of painful memories. I stayed at a cheap hotel for a few nights, just to escape, to give myself a break from everything. I thought it would help me think, but all it did was amplify the loneliness. I lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment I had spent with Sarah. The good moments, the laughter, the conversations, they all seemed tainted now. I couldn't escape the images of her and Jake, those texts, the photos. They haunted me. I spent hours scrolling through the messages on her phone again and again. I know it was unhealthy, but I couldn't stop myself. I wanted answers, but more than that, I wanted to understand why this had happened. What had I missed? Was I so blind to the signs that I couldn't even see my own wife drifting away from me? The realization that I had been living a lie was suffocating. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Sarah's face, desperate and apologetic. She had asked me for space, too, for me to think things over. I knew I needed to, but I wasn't sure if I even wanted to. Could I forgive her? Could I trust her again? More importantly, could I ever look at her the same way? The days stretched on, and I avoided contact with her. I didn't want to hear her voice or see her face. I needed distance, not just from her but from myself. The anger faded into a deeper sadness, a sadness I couldn't shake. It wasn't just about the affair anymore. It was about everything we had built together, everything that had fallen apart in an instant. And I was left trying to pick up the pieces. One night, I finally picked up the phone. I couldn't avoid her forever. Sarah had been sending me texts, begging me to talk, but I had ignored them all. But this time, I picked up. My heart pounded as I dialed her number. The seconds felt like hours as I waited for her to pick up. "Chris?" Her voice cracked when she spoke, and I immediately felt a pang of sympathy. But it wasn't enough to erase what had happened. "Please, can we talk? I need you to know how sorry I am." I leaned back against the cold walls of my hotel room, closing my eyes for a moment before I answered. "Sarah. I don't know if I can keep doing this. I don't know if I can keep pretending everything is fine." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and I could almost hear the anguish in her silence. Then she spoke, her voice soft but firm. "I don't want to lose you, Chris. I don't know what happened. I messed up, I know, but I'm willing to do anything. I want to fix this. Please, let me prove it to you." Her words were sincere. I could tell she was genuine. But the problem was, I didn't know if I could believe her. She had shattered the trust we'd built for years, and no matter how hard she tried to apologize, the damage felt irreparable. "I don't know what to say, Sarah," I finally said. "I don't know if I can ever trust you again. I can't just forget what you did." She was quiet for a long time, and I could hear her breathing heavily, her words hanging in the air. "I don't expect you to forget, Chris. But I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make this right. If you'll let me." The offer hung between us, and for a moment, I almost wanted to say yes. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe in us. But then I remembered the way I had felt when I first discovered the truth, the overwhelming sense of betrayal that had washed over me. Could I really go back to her after everything? Could I put myself through that again? Right now, I need space, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I need to figure out what I want, what I need. And I'm not sure if I can forgive you. I don't know if I can ever trust you again. There was a long silence on the other end. I understand, Sarah whispered. Take all the time you need. I love you, Chris. And I'm so sorry. I hung up without saying another word. I had no answers, no clarity. Only more questions. The future felt like a massive void in front of me, one that I had no idea how to navigate. But I knew one thing: I couldn't keep living in the past. I had to decide, once and for all, if I could move forward or if this was the end of us. The days that followed were the hardest of my life. I tried to bury myself in work, to avoid thinking about Sarah, but it was impossible. Her face haunted me everywhere I went. It wasn't just the affair that gnawed at me. It was the way she had looked at me, the way she had apologized, so desperate to make things right. I could see the pain in her eyes, but it didn't erase what she had done. It didn't undo the betrayal. I spent hours pacing my apartment, replaying the conversations, the texts, the images I had seen. I tried to convince myself to let go of the anger, to give Sarah a second chance. But every time I thought about forgiving her, the memories of the affair would come rushing back. The trust had been broken, irreparably so, and part of me wondered if it was possible to rebuild what we once had. But there was another part of me, a quieter part, that wondered if maybe I could forgive her. Could I move past the hurt, the lies? Was it possible to let go of the past and try to find something new? After all, we had spent years building a life together. Could that history be enough to help me rebuild? Could we start over? I needed time. I needed space. But I also needed to make a decision. The indecision, the constant back and forth, was killing me. It wasn't healthy for either of us. I called Sarah the next day. Hey, I said, my voice hoarse as I spoke. I think it's time we talked. There was a long pause on the other end, and then I heard her breath catch. Chris, she whispered, relief flooding her voice. Are you okay? I've been waiting for you to call. I'm not okay, I said flatly. But I'm trying to figure things out. We need to talk about what happened. About us. I know, she said quietly, but I could hear the hope in her voice. I'm ready. I'll do whatever it takes. We agreed to meet later that evening. The meeting place wasn't a fancy restaurant or a place with sentimental value. We met at a small coffee shop, neutral ground, no distractions. When I walked in, Sarah was already there, sitting in a corner, nervously stirring her coffee. She looked tired, worn out, but there was a softness to her that made my heart ache. She stood when she saw me, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. I had to look away, unable to meet her gaze. Chris, thank you for meeting me, she said softly, her voice cracking. I've been thinking about nothing but you, about us. And I just want to make things right. Please, give me the chance to fix this. I didn't know what I expected her to say, but it wasn't this. The desperation in her voice made it clear how much she wanted to salvage whatever was left of our marriage. Part of me wanted to forgive her. Part of me still loved her, still wanted to believe in what we had. But the hurt was deep, and I didn't know if I could erase the scar she had left on my heart. I don't know if I can do this, Sarah, I said, my voice low, barely above a whisper. I don't know if I can forgive you. She nodded, as if she expected that response. I understand. You have every right to feel that way. But I need you to know that I'm sorry. I'm sorry for what I did, for the lies, for betraying your trust. I've ruined everything, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to make it right. If you'll give me the chance. I looked at her, really looked at her, and I saw the woman I had fallen in love with. The woman I had spent years building a life with. The woman who had just shattered my heart. Could I really walk away from all of that? Could I really say goodbye, knowing that a part of me still cared for her? But I had to be honest with myself. I couldn't go on like this. I couldn't keep living in limbo. The pain, the confusion, it was consuming me. If I was ever going to heal, I needed closure. I needed to make a decision and stick with it. I need time, I said, my voice shaky now. I need more time to think about this. But I can't keep living like this. It's not fair to either of us. Sarah's face fell, but she didn't argue. I understand, she whispered. Take all the time you need. Just know that I'm here, and I'll wait. I'll wait as long as it takes, because I love you. I want us to be whole again. For a moment, I just stared at her, the weight of the decision bearing down on me. I wanted to say something, but the words wouldn't come. I wasn't ready to forgive her, and I wasn't ready to move on. But one thing was clear, I couldn't keep running from the truth. I had to face it. I stood up, the finality of it sinking in. I'm going to take some time, Sarah. But I don't know what the future holds. For now, I just need to find myself again. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't stop me. Take care of yourself, Chris. I'll be waiting. I walked out of the coffee shop, the door closing softly behind me. The uncertainty about our future still hung in the air, but I knew this was the first step toward healing, whether it meant reconciling with Sarah or moving on without her. For the first time in days, I felt like I had taken control again, even if just for a moment. The days after I met with Sarah were some of the hardest yet. It felt like I was caught between two worlds, the world where I was still trying to salvage what was left of my marriage, and the world where I was slowly discovering how to be alone again. Every morning, I woke up with a pit in my stomach, unsure of what to feel. Should I be angry? Should I mourn the loss of what we had? Or should I focus on rebuilding myself, taking this as a painful but necessary step forward? I spent the next week lost in a fog of confusion, forcing myself to go through the motions of my everyday life. Work, errands, eating, sleeping, none of it mattered. I was just going through the motions, trying to fill the silence with meaningless distractions. But the moments of silence were the hardest. The nights when the weight of everything came crashing down on me. I'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the conversation Sarah and I had had at the coffee shop. Her desperate, tearful plea for a second chance. I had heard her words, but I hadn't fully absorbed them. Now, they echoed in my mind, every single word a constant reminder of the choice I was faced with. What was I supposed to do? Was there even a chance that we could rebuild what we had? Could I ever look at her the same way again? It was then that I realized something. I had been so focused on the betrayal, on the lies, on the pain, that I had completely forgotten to think about myself. I had been so consumed by the wreckage of our relationship that I hadn't taken a single moment to think about what I truly needed. What did I want for my future? What did I deserve? The answer came to me unexpectedly one night, when I found myself walking aimlessly through the city. I had gone out for a walk to clear my head, but I was feeling more lost than ever. My thoughts were spiraling. As I walked past a park, I stopped at the edge of a bench, looking at the families gathered there, parents with their children, couples walking hand in hand. There was a time when I had imagined having a life like that with Sarah. But now, everything felt so distant, so foreign. And then it hit me. This wasn't about Sarah anymore. This wasn't about her betrayal, or her apology. It was about me, about who I had become, and who I wanted to be. It wasn't just about surviving this painful chapter in my life. It was about moving on and finding happiness again, whether that meant healing with Sarah or leaving her behind. For the first time in weeks, I felt a small spark of clarity. I sat on the bench, staring at the horizon, and I realized that I had spent too long waiting for someone else to fix me, to fix our marriage. I had been holding on to something that no longer existed. I had been living in the shadow of what could have been, instead of facing the reality of what was. I was ready to let go. It wasn't easy. The thoughts of Sarah still lingered, and a part of me still wanted to believe in the fairy tale ending. But I knew now that I couldn't keep sacrificing my own well-being for the sake of a relationship that was no longer healthy. It wasn't just about forgiveness, it was about finding closure for myself. The next day, I called Sarah. The decision had been made. I knew what I had to do, even if it was the hardest thing I would ever face. Sarah, I said, my voice steady but filled with emotion. I've been thinking a lot. About everything. And I've come to a conclusion. There was a long silence on the other end. I could almost hear her holding her breath. I don't think I can do this anymore, I continued, the words coming out in a rush. I can't keep living in the past. I can't keep holding on to something that isn't there anymore. I'm letting go, Sarah. I heard her gasp softly, her voice barely a whisper. Chris, please don't say that. I love you. I want to fix this. I know you do, I said, my throat tightening. But love isn't enough. I need more than that. I need peace. I need to heal, and I can't do that with all of this hanging over me. I paused, taking a deep breath. I think it's time for both of us to move forward. In different directions. The line was quiet for a long time, and I could hear her breathing heavily, fighting back tears. I understand, she whispered finally, the defeat in her voice unmistakable. I know I hurt you. And I'm so sorry. If you ever change your mind. I'm sorry, Sarah. I have to let go, I said, my voice firm now, no longer wavering. I have to move on. And so do you. There was one last, painful silence before I hung up. I sat there, staring at the phone in my hand, feeling a weight lift from my chest. I had made the decision. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done, but it was also the most necessary. In that moment, I realized something important. I didn't need to hold on to the past in order to have a future. I was allowed to move on, to find my own happiness. And while I wasn't sure what that future looked like, I knew one thing for certain: I was ready to embrace it. The days that followed my conversation with Sarah were filled with a quiet kind of peace. It wasn't the kind of peace you feel after everything is resolved, but more like the calm after a storm has passed, the kind of peace that comes from knowing you've made a decision, and that decision is final. There was still a lingering sadness, but it wasn't the overwhelming weight it had been. The pain was fading, slowly but surely. I had made the hardest choice of my life, but I knew it was the right one. Letting go of Sarah, of what we had, was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. But I had learned something important through this experience. I couldn't keep clinging to a relationship that no longer served either of us. We both needed to heal, and we couldn't do that together. Sometimes, walking away is the most loving thing you can do. It wasn't easy, but I found myself slowly starting to rebuild. I spent more time doing things for myself, rediscovering the things I had forgotten about in the chaos of my marriage. I reconnected with old friends, went for long walks in the park, and took up hobbies I had abandoned. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finding pieces of myself that had been lost. I also started seeing a therapist. It wasn't just about the betrayal anymore, it was about understanding myself, my reactions, and why I had stayed in a situation that had caused me so much pain. I realized I had been afraid of being alone, of facing the future without someone by my side. But through therapy, I began to understand that I was strong enough to face whatever came next, by myself, if necessary. Time passed. Slowly, I began to heal. The memories of Sarah didn't sting as much, and I was able to think about her without the weight of betrayal dragging me down. I didn't hate her. I didn't resent her. I simply accepted that we had been two people who had grown apart, who had made mistakes, and who needed to move on in order to be happy again. A few months later, I ran into Sarah unexpectedly at a mutual friends gathering. She looked different, calmer, more at peace. She had lost some of the weight that had been hanging over her for so long, and for the first time, she seemed like someone I didn't recognize. Not the woman who had betrayed me, but a woman who was working on herself, trying to find her own way. We exchanged polite pleasantries, but there was no awkwardness, no tension. The past was the past. We had both made our peace with it, and we could move forward, separately. It was a strange kind of closure, one that I hadn't expected but was grateful for. We had both learned from the experience. And while it was painful, it had shaped us in ways we hadn't anticipated. A year passed, and life continued. I dated again, casually at first, and then more seriously. I realized that I had so much more to offer a relationship when I was whole, when I had worked through my own wounds, instead of looking for someone else to heal me. In the end, I came to understand that the end of my marriage wasn't the end of my happiness. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one where I could finally be free from the shadows of my past and truly embrace the future. The pain had been real, but so was the growth that had come with it. I had learned to trust again, not just others, but myself. I had learned that my worth wasn't tied to someone else's actions or mistakes. I had learned that sometimes, the hardest decisions lead to the most rewarding outcomes. And most importantly, I had learned that I was enough. I stood at the threshold of a new chapter, uncertain of what was ahead but no longer afraid of it. I was ready for whatever came next. And as I walked forward, I knew that the future would be mine to shape. Sometimes the hardest decisions are the ones that shape us the most. Betrayal is painful, but it can also be a catalyst for growth. If you've ever found yourself at a crossroads, struggling to decide whether to move forward or stay stuck in the past, know that you're not alone. Life is full of twists and turns, but every step we take leads us closer to who we're meant to be. If you've ever been through something similar, I'd love to hear your story. Share your experiences in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss more gripping content like this. Remember, no matter how difficult the journey, the future is always waiting for you.